So we just had a Bible reading about Jesus sharing a drink, sharing some water from a well with a woman who was from Samaria. She was called a Samaritan woman. And in the Bible reading, it described her as being a despised Samaritan. And basically, Jesus's group of people, the Jewish people and the Samaritan people, they lived really closely. They had very, very similar religious beliefs, but they were kind of sworn enemies. Almost a bit like New South Wales and Queensland when it comes to state of origin time. These were people who shouldn't talk to each other. And on top of that, there was some gender issues in that Jesus approaching a woman alone by drinking a well place, a well where water is in the ground, it would be regarded as completely inappropriate for her to be talking to him. I think what's really positive about this story is that Jesus really wanted to cross barriers and boundaries where people were isolated and people were enemies and people were staying away from each other and where people were judging each other because of gender and sexuality. I love these examples when Jesus does that. And I think what I want to bring that to when we think about today and our time of pandemic stuff is that we are being encouraged to distance ourselves, to isolate ourselves. And I want us to think really clearly to remember that let's not let that happen socially. Let's make sure that we're doing that physically, but let's keep connected to others. And I'm pretty confident that most of you have got people that you will stay socially connected to, even if you're ever isolated physically. But I'm not worried about those people you're already connected to. I'm worried about people who already feel disconnected. So the Christian scriptures, the Jewish scriptures, talk so much about caring for the people in need, particularly those who are vulnerable, those who are sick, those who are widows, so they don't have, in that gendered society, didn't have a husband to take care of the family, and those who are orphans, didn't have parents. And the prophets kept saying, take care of these people. I want us to think now, who are the isolated today when our Prime Minister is telling us to stay away from each other? Who is more isolated? People who don't have phones and internet connection, people whose devices aren't working at the moment, people who actually don't get on that well with others, or others don't always invite them into their chats. The elderly, people who are physically isolated and can't easily get their groceries. The challenge for me at the moment is thinking, how do we connect and how do we stay connected with people, even in a culture of disconnecting physically? For me, that's a challenge. And I remember how Jesus crossed that Samaritan boundary, that gender boundary, to stay connected with a woman who would have been quite isolated in any other reason. I encourage you at the moment to think about those in your year level who, or maybe even in your tutor group, who you don't know if they've got good connections with others. To think about those people. To think about those people in your neighbourhood who might need some support. And to be creative in the ways that you connect and show love. Love doesn't have to happen with physical connection. It can happen with distance. And in this time, I want us to be creative about that. I think that's our call. My job is to try to take these scriptures and work out how they speak to us, how they're relevant today. And so I really pray for us each as we head out to another week, another day, another day of school, another day of news, that we might bring some of the spiritual nourishment of being on our own. There's a great history spiritually of people finding time alone nourishing. It can be really hard. Last week I heard from Lindisfarne, a school up at Tweed Heads, about how their Year 9 students have a camp where they are in tents, where they can see each other, but they're not allowed to talk and they have no devices. It's a solo experience. And there was a video showing us how the students, what that was like for them to be solo for a while. I pray that we might have nourishment in those times where we're a bit more alone, that we might have opportunities to turn off the things that are always in our face, our constant feeds, that we might be able to use mindfulness practices to get to know ourselves a bit more and be comfortable in our own space and in that of those we live with. And I pray blessings upon you in the days ahead. Amen.